It began with a sound, a hollow, splintering crack that echoed through the empty halls of the old orphanage, long after the last child's laughter had faded into memory. The building, abandoned for decades, stood hunched against the sky like a wounded animal, its windows blind, its doors sealed by rust and neglect. But on that cold morning, as a team of workers pried up the warped floorboards in the main hall, something ancient and restless seemed to stir beneath their feet. Dust billowed in the pale light, swirling around the men's boots as they worked. The air was thick with the scent of rot and old secrets, the kind that cling to your skin and settle in your lungs. Beneath the boards, they found not the expected tangle of pipes or forgotten toys, but something far more disturbing, a hidden cavity, lined with crumbling brick, and within it, objects that should never have been there. Tiny shoes, brittle with age, a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked in a silent scream. And then, the unmistakable shape of small, delicate bones. What we found will haunt you. This is not just a story of a building left to decay, or of children lost to time. It is a story of innocence betrayed, of secrets buried so deep that even the earth itself seemed to conspire in their concealment. Tonight, we will descend into the darkness beneath the floorboards, where the past refuses to stay silent. If you think you know what happened here, think again. The truth is far more chilling than any ghost story, and it's waiting just beneath your feet. Perched atop a windswept hill, at the edge of a small, fog-shrouded town, the orphanage loomed over the landscape like a silent sentinel. Its silhouette was unmistakably sprawling, three-story structure of weathered stone and red brick, crowned with a steep slate roof and a bell tower that had long since fallen silent. Ivy clung to its walls, crawling up toward the broken windows, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim what humanity had abandoned. In the mornings, the building was often shrouded in mist, its sharp angles softened by the gray veil. But as the sun rose, the orphanage emerged in stark relief, casting long, skeletal shadows across the overgrown grounds. The main entrance was framed by heavy oak doors, their iron hinges rusted and ornate, bearing the faded crest of the charitable society that had founded the institution in 1867. Above the doors, a stone plaque read, "St. Agnes Home for Orphaned Children Sanctuary," and "Hope." The words, carved with such conviction, seemed almost to mock the reality that unfolded within. The grounds themselves were a study in contrasts. Once, there had been a garden, carefully tended by the children, with neat rows of vegetables and a scattering of wildflowers. Now, weeds choked the paths, and the garden beds had become little more than mounds of tangled roots and broken memories. Inside, the orphanage was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and echoing chambers. The walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, had faded to a sickly, peeling hue. The floors creaked with every step, and the air was perpetually tinged with the scent of mildew and old soap. In the main hall, a grand staircase swept upward, its banister polished smooth by generations of small hands. Portraits of benefactors lined the walls, their eyes following you with a gaze that felt more accusatory than benevolent. At the far end of the hall, a stained-glass window depicted St. Agnes herself, cradling a lamb, her expression serene and distant. The orphanage was a product of its time, of time when society's unwanted children were hidden away, out of sight and out of mind. The late 19th century was an era of grand philanthropic gestures, but also of deep social divides. The town below the hill was a patchwork of cobbled streets and soot-stained factories, its people hardened by poverty and loss. For many, the orphanage represented hope, a place where children could be fed, clothed, and educated. But for others, it was a necessary evil, a place to send the inconvenient, the illegitimate, the forgotten. On Sundays, townsfolk would gather at the iron gates, peering through the bars to catch a glimpse of the children at play. The headmistress, always impeccably dressed, would greet visitors with a practiced smile, her voice warm and reassuring. Donations were collected, prayers were offered, and the community congratulated itself on its charity. Yet, Behind the orphanage's imposing facade, a different reality simmered. The staff was small and overworked, their tempers frayed by long hours and meager pay. Discipline was strict, sometimes cruel, justified in the name of order and salvation. Whispers of harsh punishments and unexplained illnesses drifted through the town, but few dared to question the institution's authority. At night, the orphanage transformed. The laughter of children faded, replaced by the low hum of fear and longing. The wind rattled the window panes, and the old building seemed to groan under the weight of its own secrets. Some said the place was haunted, that the spirits of lost children wandered the halls, searching for comfort that never came. Others dismissed such tales as superstition, the product of overactive imaginations and guilty consciences. But even the most skeptical could not ignore the sense of unease that clung to the orphanage like a second skin. There was something about the way the shadows pooled in the corners, the way the floorboards seemed to sigh beneath your feet, that suggested the building itself was watching, waiting. The benevolent mask of St. Agnes' home was just that, a mask, carefully maintained for the world to see, while beneath it, something darker festered. As the years passed, the orphanage's reputation grew more ambiguous. Some children left, adopted by families or sent to work in distant towns. Others simply vanished, their names quietly erased from the ledgers, their beds filled by new arrivals. The staff offered explanations, accidents, the unpredictable whims of fate, but the townspeople began to whisper, and the children learned to keep their fears to themselves. It is here, on this lonely hill, in the shadow of a building that promised sanctuary but delivered something far more sinister, that our story truly begins. For beneath the orphanage's crumbling floors and faded walls, secrets waited, patient, silent, and hungry for the light. At the heart of every haunted place are the people who once called it home, and St. Agnes's orphanage was no exception. Its story is not just one of bricks and shadows, but of lives shaped and shattered within its walls. It's one, a thread in a tapestry of sorrow and silence. Presiding over the orphanage was Headmistress Eleanor Blackwood, a woman whose presence filled every room she entered. Tall and severe, with iron-gray hair always pulled into a tight chignon, she wore her authority like armor. Her eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to see straight through to the soul, and her voice could silence a room with a single word. To the townsfolk, she was the embodiment of discipline and Christian charity, a pillar of the community who had dedicated her life to the care of the unfortunate. But to the children, she was a figure of both awe and dread. Her kindness, when it appeared, was measured and conditional, doled out like medicine. She kept meticulous records, her ledger filled with neat, looping script names, dates, infractions, and, sometimes, quiet notations that no one else would ever see. Rumors swirled about her past, a lost child, a failed marriage, a secret she guarded as fiercely as the orphanage itself. In the shadows behind her moved Mr. Thomas Finch, the caretaker. He was a man of few words, his face weathered by years of hard labor and silent suffering. Finch was always there, fixing broken windows, tending the boiler, shoveling coal in the dead of winter. The children rarely heard him speak, but they watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination. His limp, the result of an old injury, made his footsteps easy to recognize, a slow, dragging rhythm that echoed through the halls at night. Some said he had once been an orphan himself, raised within these very walls, and that he knew every secret passage and hidden room. Others whispered that he had seen things no one should see, and that the weight of those memories had bent his back and sealed his lips. Among the children, a few stood out, each one carrying their own burdens, their own hopes and fears. There was Clara, the eldest at 13, with a sharp mind and a stubborn streak that often landed her in trouble. She had arrived at St. Agnes after her parents died in a factory fire, and she quickly became a surrogate mother to the younger children. Clara's courage was legendary. She would sneak extra bread from the kitchen, comfort those who woke screaming in the night, and challenge the headmistress's rules with the defiant tilt of her chin. Yet beneath her bravado, she was haunted by dreams of smoke and flame. and by the gnawing fear that she, too, would be forgotten. Then there was Samuel, a quiet boy of 10, with a shock of unruly red hair and a talent for drawing. Samuel rarely spoke, but his notebooks were filled with sketches of the orphanage, of the other children, of strange shapes lurking in the corners. He had a way of seeing things others missed, and sometimes he would stare at the floorboards for hours, as if listening for something only he could hear. The other children teased him for his oddness, but Clara always defended him, insisting that Samuel was just different, not broken. Little Mary, only 6, was the youngest and most fragile. She had arrived at the orphanage with nothing but a faded blue ribbon and a story no one believed, a story about a woman in white who sang her to sleep at night. Mary clung to Clara, following her like a shadow, and was terrified of the dark. She would often wake sobbing, insisting that someone was whispering her name from beneath the floor. The staff dismissed her fears as nightmares, but the other children began to listen, especially when the whispers grew louder. There was also Peter, a wiry boy of 12, with a quick wit and quicker fingers, orphaned by the fever that swept through the town. Peter survived by his wits, stealing apples from the pantry and sneaking out after curfew. He was the first to notice when a child went missing, the first to question the official explanations. Peter's skepticism made him a target for punishment, but it also made him a leader among the children, a role he wore uneasily, knowing that asking questions in St. Agnes could be dangerous. Each of these children, and many more whose names have been lost to time, lived in a world defined by uncertainty and fear. They formed alliances, whispered secrets, and clung to small comforts, a shared crust of bread, a lullaby hummed in the dark, a promise that they would look out for one another. But even as they tried to build a family from the fragments of their broken lives, the orphanage itself seemed to conspire against them, swallowing their laughter and replacing it with silence. Their stories, woven together, form the heart of what happened at St. Agnes. For it was not just the cruelty of adults or the indifference of the world that doomed them, but the slow, relentless erosion of hope. As the days grew shorter and the shadows lengthened, the children learned to listen for the sounds beneath the floorboards and to wonder which of them would be the next to disappear. It began, as so many tragedies do, with a single, unremarkable absence. One morning, as the children lined up for their meager breakfast of porridge and stale bread, a small voice piped up from the back of the dining hall. "Where's Elsie?" The question hung in the air, met with a hush that seemed to settle over the entire room. Elsie, a quiet girl with a gap-toothed smile and a fondness for collecting wildflowers, had not returned to her bed the night before. Her pillow was cold, her blanket neatly folded, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Headmistress Blackwood dismissed the concern with a wave of her hand. "Elsie has been sent to a new family," she announced, her tone brisk and final. "She is fortunate, and we should all be happy for her." The children exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to question her further. After all, children came and went from St. Agnes all the time, sometimes with a suitcase and a hopeful smile, sometimes with nothing at all. But Clara, ever watchful, noticed the way Mr. Finch avoided her gaze that morning, and how the headmistress's hands trembled ever so slightly as she poured her tea. In the days that followed, the orphanage seemed to grow colder, the shadows in the corridors stretching longer with each passing hour. At night, the wind howled around the eaves, rattling the windows and making the old building groan. The children huddled together in their beds, whispering stories to chase away the darkness. But the stories soon took on a life of their own, fed by the strange noises that echoed through the halls after lights out, the soft creak of floorboards, the distant thud of footsteps, the faint sound of weeping that seemed to come from beneath the floor. Samuel, with his artist's eyes and restless curiosity, was the first to notice the pattern. He began marking the nights when the noises were loudest, sketching crude maps of the orphanage, and noting the places where the floor seemed to vibrate with hidden life. He confided in Clara, showing her the strange symbols he had drawn, eyes and jagged lines that made her shiver. "It's like something's moving down there," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something that doesn't want to be found." Then, just as the children began to adjust to Elsie's absence, another child disappeared. This time it was Henry, a sturdy boy with a mischievous grin and a talent for climbing trees. He was last seen in the garden, chasing after a stray cat, as dusk settled over the orphanage. When he failed to return for supper, the staff searched the grounds, calling his name into the gathering gloom. But Henry was gone, leaving behind only a muddy footprint near the back door and a single, torn button from his coat. The headmistress's explanation was the same as before. "Henry has been adopted. We should be grateful." But the children were no longer so easily reassured. They began to notice other things, small, unsettling details that seemed to multiply with each passing day. The way the cellar door was always locked now, even during the day. The strange stains that appeared on the floorboards in the main hall, dark and sticky, quickly scrubbed away by Mr. Finch before anyone could ask questions. The way the staff spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously over their shoulders as if afraid of being overheard. Mary, the youngest, became increasingly withdrawn, clutching her blue ribbon and refusing to leave Clara's side. She insisted that she heard voices calling her name at night, soft and insistent, rising up from the darkness beneath her bed. "They're lonely," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "They want me to come play." The other children tried to comfort her, but they too had begun to sense the orphanage's growing unease. Even Peter, who prided himself on his skepticism, admitted that he had seen strange lights flickering under the floorboards late at night, as if someone or something was moving through the hidden spaces below. The staff grew more irritable, their tempers fraying as the disappearances continued. Punishments became harsher, and the children learned to keep their fears to themselves. But the sense of dread was impossible to ignore. Every creak, every whisper, every unexplained draft became a potential omen. The orphanage, once merely a place of sorrow and routine, now felt alive with menace, as if the building itself was conspiring to keep its secrets hidden. One night, Clara awoke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the dormitory. They were slow and deliberate, pausing just outside the door before moving on. She held her breath, listening as the footsteps faded into the distance, then rose again from somewhere below. The next morning, she found a small, muddy handprint on the inside of the window, too small to belong to any of the staff, and smeared as if someone had been trying to escape. What would you have done if you heard those footsteps at night? Would you have dared to follow, to peer into the darkness and confront whatever waited beneath the floorboards? Or would you, like so many before, have pulled the covers over your head and prayed for morning? The children of St. Agnes had no choice but to endure, their world shrinking with each new disappearance, their hope flickering like a candle in the wind. And all the while, the whispers and shadows grew bolder, promising that the worst was yet to come. As autumn deepened and the days grew short, the orphanage on the hill became a place of unrelenting dread. The disappearances, once rare and easily explained away, began to multiply. Each week seemed to bring another empty bed, another name quietly erased from the headmistress's ledger. The children, once noisy and unruly, moved through the halls like ghosts, their laughter replaced by anxious whispers and sidelong glances. Even the youngest learned to count the missing, to memorize the faces that vanished from the breakfast table, to wonder if they would be next. The staff, stretched thin and haunted by their own fears, clung to routine with desperate fervor. Headmistress Blackwood's morning prayers grew longer, her voice rising in brittle supplication as she urged the children to trust in God's plan. "We are tested," she intoned, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. "But the Lord sees all, and He will protect the pure of heart." Yet her eyes darted nervously to the windows, and her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line whenever another child failed to appear for roll call. Mr. Finch, the silent caretaker, became a shadow within a shadow. He was seen less and less, emerging only at dusk to tend the fires or patch a broken window. The children watched him with growing suspicion, noting the way he lingered near the cellar door, the way he flinched at sudden noises. Some whispered that he was the one taking the children, spiriting them away into the labyrinth beneath the orphanage. Others insisted he was trying to protect them, that he alone knew the truth of what lurked below. Outside the orphanage walls, the town remained willfully blind. The local vicar preached sermons about the virtue of charity, praising St. Agnes as a beacon of hope in a world darkened by sin. Parents who had surrendered their children to the orphanage clung to the belief that they were safe, that the institution's stern discipline was a necessary kindness. When rumors of the disappearances began to circulate, they were quickly dismissed as childish fantasy or malicious gossip. Children run away, the townsfolk said. They're wild, ungrateful, they don't know how good they have it. The mayor, eager to avoid scandal, assured everyone that the orphanage was under constant supervision, that every child was accounted for. But the children knew better. They saw the truth in the empty beds, in the haunted eyes of their friends, in the way the staff avoided certain questions. They began to form secret alliances, meeting in the attic or behind the garden wall to share what they knew. Clara, always the leader, kept a careful list of the missing, her handwriting growing shakier with each new name. Peter, ever resourceful, began to search for patterns, times, places, anything that might explain the disappearances. Samuel, with his uncanny intuition, drew maps of the orphanage's hidden spaces. Convinced that the answer lay beneath their feet, fear became a constant companion. The children slept in shifts, taking turns keeping watch while the others tried to rest. They barricaded the dormitory doors with chairs and trunks, whispering prayers and promises to protect one another. But the sense of safety was an illusion, easily shattered by the next unexplained noise. The next cold draft that swept through the halls. Mary, the youngest, grew pale and silent, her eyes ringed with shadows. She clung to Clara, refusing to let go, even as the older girl tried to comfort her. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I hear them calling my name." The line between innocence and corruption blurred with each passing day. The staff, once trusted authority figures, became objects of suspicion and fear. The children learned to hide their true feelings, to smile and nod during prayers while their minds raced with plans for escape. They watched the headmistress with wary eyes, noting the way her sermons grew more desperate, her punishments more severe. She began to single out those who asked too many questions, sending them to the cellar for reflection. Few returned unchanged. Some did not return at all. Faith, once a source of comfort, became a tool of manipulation. The headmistress invoked scripture to justify her actions, insisting that suffering was a test of character, that obedience would be rewarded. She led the children in hymns, her voice trembling with fervor, but the words rang hollow in the echoing halls. The children sang along, their voices thin and uncertain, their eyes fixed on the floor. They no longer believed in salvation. They believed only in survival. Rumors swirled like autumn leaves, carried on the wind from dormitory to dormitory. Some said the orphanage was cursed, built on the site of an ancient graveyard. Others claimed that the headmistress had made a pact with dark forces, trading the children's souls for her own salvation. A few whispered that the missing children were still alive, trapped in the tunnels beneath the floorboards, waiting for someone to rescue them. The truth, whatever it was, remained elusive, a shadow, flickering at the edge of vision, always just out of reach. The community's denial only deepened the children's isolation. Letters sent to the outside world went unanswered, and visitors were carefully managed, shown only the sunlit rooms and well-behaved children. The reality of St. Agnes was hidden behind a veneer of order and piety, maintained at all costs. The children learned to play their parts, to smile for the benefactors, and recite their lessons by rote. But beneath the surface, fear festered, growing stronger with each new loss. As winter approached, the orphanage seemed to shrink, its walls closing in around the dwindling group of survivors. The air grew colder, the nights longer, and the sense of impending doom became impossible to ignore. The children clung to one another, their innocence eroded by terror, their faith twisted into something unrecognizable. They waited, breathless, for the next disappearance, the next whisper in the dark. The next set of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. And all the while, the secrets beneath the floorboards waited, patient and hungry, for the final act to begin. The first outsider to truly question the orphanage's story was not a parent, nor a priest, but a young journalist named Arthur Bell. He arrived in the town one gray November morning, his coat dusted with rain and his notebook already half filled with rumors. Arthur was not from the area. He had grown up in the city, where the shadows were different, but no less menacing. He had heard whispers of St. Agnes in a crowded pub, stories traded over cheap gin and nervous laughter. Children vanishing, townsfolk looking the other way, a headmistress with secrets. It was the kind of story that could make a career or ruin one. Arthur's first impression of the orphanage was of a place frozen in time. The building's grandeur was faded, but its presence was undeniable. He introduced himself at the front door, presenting his credentials to Headmistress Blackwood, who greeted him with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We are always grateful for interest in our work," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "But I assure you, there is nothing here but the usual hardships of caring for so many unfortunate souls." He was given a tour brief, carefully curated. The children he met were quiet, their eyes downcast, their answers rehearsed. The dormitories were tidy, the classrooms orderly, the kitchen bustling with activity. Yet Arthur's instincts told him something was wrong. He noticed the locked doors, the rooms that were hurriedly closed as he approached, the way the staff watched him with thinly veiled suspicion. He made notes of every detail, every nervous glance, every whispered warning. Arthur tried to speak, with the children alone, but was always interrupted by a member of staff. Only once did he manage a brief conversation with Clara, who met his gaze with a mixture of hope and defiance. "Are you here to help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, the headmistress appeared, her hand firm on Clara's shoulder, her smile sharper than before. "The children are easily confused by strangers," she said, steering the girl away. "Best not to trouble them with questions." Undeterred, Arthur began to dig deeper. He visited the town's records office, poring over ledgers and adoption papers. He found discrepancies: children listed as adopted who had no corresponding records, names that appeared and disappeared with alarming frequency. He spoke with townsfolk, most of whom were reluctant to talk. Some insisted the orphanage was a blessing, others muttered about curses and bad luck. A few, after a drink or two, admitted that things had always been strange up on the hill, but quickly changed the subject. Arthur's investigation was met with increasing resistance. The mayor, a stout man with a politician's practiced smile, warned him to mind his own business. The local constable, when pressed about the missing children, shrugged and said kids run off all the time, nothing to be done. Even the vicar, who had once praised the orphanage from the pulpit, grew cold when Arthur mentioned the disappearances. "We must have faith," he said, eyes fixed on the altar. "God's will is not for us to question." But Arthur was not easily deterred. He returned to the orphanage under the pretense of delivering a donation, using the opportunity to slip away from his guide. He found himself in the east wing, where the air was colder and the walls seemed to close in. There, he discovered a door half hidden behind a faded tapestry. It was locked, but Arthur's curiosity was stronger than his caution. He waited until nightfall, then returned with a borrowed key. The room beyond was small and windowless, filled with the detritus of forgotten lives, broken toys, tattered clothing, a stack of old ledgers. Arthur rifled through the papers, his heart pounding as he read the names of children who had never been adopted, whose fates were marked only by a single, chilling word: gone. He pocketed a few pages, intending to study them later, but was startled by a noise behind him. Mr. Finch stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," Finch said, his voice low and rough. "Some things are best left alone." Arthur tried to reason with him, to appeal to his conscience. "Children are missing," he said. "People deserve to know the truth." Finch hesitated, his eyes flickering with something like guilt. "You don't understand," he whispered. "This place, it's not what it seems. There are things you can't see, things you don't want to see. Before Arthur could press further, footsteps echoed down the hall. Finch slipped away, leaving Arthur alone with his stolen evidence and a growing sense of dread. The next day, Arthur attempted to confront Head Mistress Blackwood with what he had found. She listened in silence, her expression inscrutable. When he finished, she smiled, a cold, empty smile. "You have a vivid imagination, Mr. Bell. I suggest you leave before you cause any more trouble." He was escorted from the premises, his notes confiscated, his reputation quietly smeared among the townsfolk. Doors that had once opened to him were now firmly shut. But Arthur was not the only one searching for answers. Inside the orphanage, Clara and Peter had begun their own investigation. They mapped the times and places of each disappearance, noting that they always occurred at night, always near the main hall. Samuel, with his uncanny sense for the unseen, insisted that the floorboards in that part of the building were hollow, that something moved beneath them when the moon was high. One night, the children gathered in secret, determined to uncover the truth. They waited until the staff was asleep, then crept through the darkened halls, their hearts pounding in their chests. They pried up a loose board in the main hall, revealing a narrow crawl space below. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Armed with a single candle, they crawled into the darkness, their hands trembling as they felt their way forward. What they found was worse than anything they had imagined. The crawl space was a maze of tunnels, lined with crumbling brick and rotting timbers. Here and there, they found scraps of clothing, broken toys, and, most chillingly, small handprints, pressed into the dirt. The walls seemed to close in around them, the silence broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. Suddenly, a noise echoed from deeper in the tunnel, a soft, shuffling sound, as if something was moving just out of sight. The children froze, their candle flickering. Clara whispered for them to turn back, but Peter pressed on, his curiosity stronger than his fear. They followed the sound to a small chamber, where the earth had been disturbed, as if something or someone had been buried there. Before they could investigate further, a voice called out from above. It was Mr. Finch, his tone urgent and afraid. "Get out, now." The children scrambled back to the surface, their clothes torn and faces streaked with dirt. Finch met them at the opening, his face pale. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice shaking. "Some secrets are better left buried." The children returned to their beds, shaken and silent. They knew now that the truth was far darker than any of the stories whispered in the night. The orphanage was not just a place of sorrow and loss, it was a place of secrets, protected by those who feared what would happen if the world ever learned what lay beneath the floorboards. Arthur Bell left town soon after, his story unfinished, his evidence lost. But the children remained, trapped in a world where reason and superstition collided, where every answer only led to more questions. The investigation had scratched the surface, but the darkness below was deeper than anyone had dared to imagine. And as winter settled over the orphanage, the secrets beneath the floorboards waited, patient and undisturbed, for the day when someone would finally bring them into the light. Are you ready to hear what was found? This is the moment where the whispers become screams, where the shadows take shape, and the truth so long denied rises from the darkness beneath the floorboards. If you followed this story so far, you know the fear, the suspicion, the gnawing sense that something was terribly wrong at St. Agnes. But nothing could prepare anyone for what was finally uncovered. It happened on a night when the wind howled so fiercely that the old orphanage seemed to shudder with every gust. The children, restless and sleepless, huddled together in the dormitory, their eyes wide and unblinking. Clara, Peter, and Samuel had not spoken of their discovery in the tunnels, but the memory of that suffocating darkness clung to them like a second skin. Even Mary, who had once whispered of voices in the night, was silent, her small hands clutching her blue ribbon until her knuckles turned white. That night, the storm grew so violent that a section of the main hall's floor collapsed with a thunderous crash. The sound jolted everyone awake. The staff rushed to the scene, lanterns bobbing in the darkness, their faces pale with fear. The children, forbidden to leave their beds, crept to the edge of the stairwell, peering down at the chaos below. What they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The floor had given way, revealing a yawning black pit beneath the hall. The air that rose from it was cold and fetid, thick with the stench of earth and something far worse. The staff hesitated at the edge, their lanterns casting trembling shadows on the walls. Mr. Finch, his face ashen, was the first to descend, his hands shaking as he lowered himself into the darkness. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. What they found was a hidden chamber, larger than anyone could have imagined. The walls were lined with crumbling brick, slick with moisture and streaked with mold. The floor was uneven, the earth disturbed in places, as if something had been buried and unearthed again and again. And everywhere were the remnants of lost childhoods, broken toys, faded ribbons, scraps of clothing, and, most chilling of all, the small, fragile bones of children. There were dozens of them, some arranged in shallow graves, others scattered as if they had tried to claw their way to the surface. Tiny shoes, still laced, lay beside skeletal feet. Dolls with cracked porcelain faces stared sightlessly from the dirt. A rusted tin whistle, a wooden soldier, a lock of hair tied with a red thread each, item a silent testament to a life cut short, a story never told. The staff recoiled in horror, some collapsing to their knees, others retching into the darkness. Headmistress Blackwood stood at the edge of the pit, her face a mask of shock and denial. For a moment, she seemed to age 20 years, her posture crumpling as the weight of her secrets pressed down upon her. Mr. Finch wept openly, his tears carving clean lines through the grime on his cheeks. The children, watching from above, could not look away. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized Elsie's favorite hair ribbon, half buried in the dirt. Peter saw the button from Henry's coat, the one he had found near the garden. Samuel, trembling, realized that the strange symbols he had drawn were etched into the walls of the chamber, scratched there by desperate hands. The truth was undeniable. The missing children had not been adopted, nor had they run away. They had been taken one by one into the darkness beneath the orphanage, their lives extinguished and their bodies hidden away. The reasons, at first, seemed unfathomable. Was it the work of a single madman, a conspiracy among the staff, or something even darker, something that had festered in the heart of St. Agnes for generations? As the authorities were summoned and the investigation began in earnest, more horrors came to light. The tunnels beneath the orphanage were far more extensive than anyone had realized, a labyrinth of passageways and chambers that twisted beneath the hill. Some had been used for storage, others for punishment, crude cells with iron bars, stained with old blood. In one chamber, they found a journal, its pages warped with damp, the ink smeared but still legible. The journal belonged to a former caretaker, long dead, who wrote of discipline and cleansing, of children who were unfit and unworthy. He described punishments that grew more severe as the years passed, culminating in the ultimate act of cruelty, locking children in the tunnels, leaving them to die in the dark. The headmistress's name appeared again and again, her approval implicit in every entry. She had known, she had allowed it. Perhaps, in her twisted mind, she believed she was saving the others, purging the orphanage of sin. But the truth was even more complicated. Some of the staff had tried to intervene, to save the children, but were silenced or dismissed. Mr. Finch, it was revealed, had been a child at St. Agnes himself, a survivor of the tunnels, who had returned as an adult, haunted by guilt and unable to break the cycle. The community, to bore its share of blame, turning a blind eye, accepting the orphanage's explanations, refusing to see what was right beneath their feet. As the bodies were exhumed and the evidence catalogued, the town was forced to confront the enormity of what had happened. The newspapers called it a tragedy, a scandal, a horror beyond comprehension. But for the children who survived, and for those who never had a chance, words were not enough. The orphanage was closed, its windows boarded up, its grounds left to rot. The hill became a place of silence, the shadows deeper than ever. And yet, the story does not end there. The scars left by St. Agnes would never fully heal. The survivors carried their trauma into adulthood, their dreams haunted by the cries of those left behind. The town, shamed and shaken, tried to forget, but the memory lingered an open wound, a warning, a question that could never be answered. Are you still with me? Do you feel the chill that lingers in the air, the weight of all those lost voices? This is what was found beneath the floorboards. Not just bones and broken toys, but the truth of what happens when innocence is betrayed, when faith is twisted into cruelty, when a community chooses blindness over compassion. It is a story that demands to be remembered, no matter how much we might wish to look away. So, I ask you, what would you have done, standing at the edge of that pit, staring into the darkness? Would you have had the courage to face what was hidden? Or would you, like so many before, have turned away? The secrets of St. Agnes are out now, but the shadows remain, waiting for someone else to listen, to remember, to finally bring them into the light. In the days and weeks that followed the revelation, the town of Ashwick was gripped by a silence deeper than any winter frost. The orphanage, once a symbol of charity and hope, now stood as a monument to horror, a place no one wished to remember, yet no one could forget. The authorities came and went, their questions sharp and unyielding, their faces growing grayer with each new discovery. The newspapers called it a tragedy, a scandal, a blight on the town's soul. But for those who had lived within those walls, the true aftermath was something far more intimate and far more enduring. The surviving children were scattered, sent to distant relatives, foster homes, or other institutions. Some were adopted by families who tried, with varying degrees of success, to offer comfort and stability. But the wounds left by St. Agnes were not so easily healed. Clara, once the fierce protector, found herself unable to sleep through the night, haunted by dreams of tunnels and the cold touch of unseen hands. She grew wary of closed doors and dark spaces, her trust in adults forever fractured. Peter, who had always questioned and resisted, became withdrawn, his quick wit dulled by a grief he could not name. He carried with him a single button from Henry's coat, a talisman against the darkness that still lingered at the edge of his mind. Samuel, whose drawings had once been dismissed as childish fantasy, was sent to a distant cousin in the city. He stopped drawing altogether, his notebooks left untouched in a dusty attic. The images that had once brought him solace now filled him with dread. Mary, the youngest, was adopted by a kind couple who tried to coax her out of her silence, but she spoke little, her blue ribbon the only remnant of a childhood stolen by fear. She would sometimes wake in the night, sobbing, convinced that the voices from beneath the floorboards were calling her home. The staff of St. Agnes faced their own reckoning. Headmistress Blackwood was arrested, her trial a spectacle that drew crowds from miles around. She sat in the dock, her face a mask of composure, insisting that she had only ever acted in the children's best interests. Her words rang hollow in the courtroom, drowned out by the testimony of survivors and the evidence unearthed from the tunnels. She was convicted, but her sentence brought little comfort to those whose lives she had shattered. Mr. Finch, broken by guilt and grief, disappeared from the town, his fate unknown. Some said he wandered the countryside, seeking forgiveness that would never come. The community, too, was forced to confront its complicity. For years, the people of Ashwick had looked up at the orphanage on the hill and seen only what they wished to see: a place of order, of discipline, of salvation. They had ignored the whispers, dismissed the rumors, and accepted the headmistress's reassurances without question. Now, faced with the truth, they struggled to reconcile their faith with the reality of what had been allowed to happen. Some turned to the church, seeking absolution in prayer. Others turned away, unable to bear the weight of their own silence. The legacy of St. Agnes became a wound that would not close. The building was left to rot, its windows boarded and its grounds overgrown. No one dared to set foot inside, not even the bravest of the town's children. The stories persisted, growing darker with each retelling. Some said the cries of the lost could still be heard on stormy nights, echoing through the empty halls. Others claim to see ghostly figures at the windows, their faces pressed against the glass, waiting for someone to remember their names. Yet, amid the horror, there were moments of resilience. Some survivors found ways to heal, to build new lives from the ruins of the old. They formed bonds with one another, sharing their stories in quiet voices, refusing to let the past be buried again. A few returned to Ashwick as adults, determined to ensure that what happened at St. Agnes would never be forgotten. They placed a small plaque at the edge of the orphanage grounds, its inscription simple but unyielding, in memory of those lost and those who survived. May we never look away again. But the scars remained, etched into the hearts of all who had been touched by the orphanage's shadow. For some, the nightmares never faded. For others, the pain became a quiet ache, a reminder of innocence betrayed and trust destroyed. The town itself was changed, its sense of safety forever shaken. The story of St. Agnes became a cautionary tale, a warning whispered to children on cold, dark nights. Beware the silence. Beware the secrets that hide beneath the floorboards. And so, the legacy of the orphanage endured not as a place of hope, but as a testament to the darkness that can flourish when compassion is replaced by indifference, when faith is twisted into cruelty, and when a community chooses to look away. The scars may never fully heal, but the memory remains, demanding that we remember, that we bear witness, and that we never allow such horrors to be buried again. In the end, the story of St. Agnes's orphanage is not just a tale of horror, but a mirror held up to the darkest corners of our own hearts and histories. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the fragility of innocence, and the ease with which a community can become complicit in its own undoing. How many times have we, in our own lives, chosen the comfort of ignorance over the pain of truth? How often do we look away from suffering, trusting that someone else will intervene, that the world is not as cruel as it sometimes appears? The tragedy of St. Agnes was not born in a single act of malice, but in 1,000 small choices each, one a step away from empathy, a step toward silence. The headmistress, the caretaker, the townsfolk, even the children themselves were caught in a web of fear, shame, and denial. It is easy to condemn them from a distance, to insist that we would have acted differently, but would we too, have been lulled by the orphanage's benevolent facade, reassured by the rituals of faith and charity, unwilling to see what was hidden in plain sight? History is filled with stories like this, stories of institutions that failed the vulnerable, of secrets buried beneath the floorboards, of voices silenced by those who should have listened. The question is not just what happened at St. Agnes, but what still happens, in places we pass every day, in systems we trust, without question. How many secrets remain buried in your own town, your own community, your own family? What would it take to bring them into the light? I invite you to reflect on these questions, to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed something that didn't feel right, but felt powerless to change it? Do you believe that evil is the work of a few, or the result of many small acts of indifference? What responsibility do we bear for the suffering of others? And how can we ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated? If you're brave enough, share your own stories of courage, of regret, of moments when you chose to see, or chose to look away. Let this community be a place where the forgotten are remembered, where the shadows are named, and where the truth, no matter how painful, is never buried again. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darkness beneath St. Agnes Orphanage. If you've made it this far, you've shown a rare courage, the willingness to confront the uncomfortable, to listen to the voices that history tried to silence, and to remember those who were lost. Stories like this are not easy to hear, but they are necessary. They remind us that the shadows of the past are never as far away as we'd like to believe, and that the only way to keep them at bay is to face them together. If this story moved you, unsettled you, or made you question what you thought you knew about the world, I invite you to become part of this community. Subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the unexplained. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Your thoughts, your theories, your own stories, they matter. They are the light that keeps the darkness from closing in. And if you think this was disturbing, wait until you hear what we uncovered next. There are more secrets waiting in the shadow stories of haunted asylums, vanished towns, and mysteries that defy explanation. Some truths are even stranger and more chilling than fiction. So stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the past is never truly buried. The shadows remain, and they are always watching. Until next time, take care and don't be afraid to look beneath the floorboards.